Have you ever been in a situation where you are lecturing your child or trying to have a conversation with them because they are not listening to you, or they have done something that they're not supposed to do, or they've done something that they knew that they shouldn't, and you see them all of a sudden get that blank stare where they look like they're not paying attention, they're not giving you any feedback, and they look like they've shut down, or they're just, yes sir, yes sir, yes ma'am, I got it, I understand. And you know that they're doing that to appease you, and you feel all of a sudden triggered because you know that they're not listening to you, and you know that they're just not at all taking in what you're saying. That is a trauma response, and you are wasting your time continuing the conversation. Let me explain. Leslie Wells, Connection Coach here. I help individuals heal, improve, and thrive in their romantic relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens. So we get our attachment styles from our parents. Our primary caregivers give us messages and information about how to give and receive love, conflict, intimacy, all of the things that we're going to take later in life and apply in our adult relationships. And so as parents, we need to not only work on our secure attachment with our partners so that our children can see how to appropriately have a good, healthy, secure marriage, how to navigate conflict, how to have true intimacy and transparency. They learn all of those things through modeling, and they also learn them through our interactions with them. So if you have an insecure attachment style that you have not healed, you are very much going to impact the attachment style of your child. So when you're having a conversation with your child, and I typically see this in parents who are triggered and they go into a long rant with their child, or they're really kind of getting on their butt and scolding them. And at some point the child just shuts down, and they're physically present, but you can tell that they're either rolling their eyes, giving you the side eye, or they're just, and they have checked out, and you know it. And typically the response is to get triggered that they're not listening to you. Especially I noticed for dismissive, avoidant men who grew up not having a voice and having no emotional attunement from their own caregivers. And so for them, respect is extremely important because they were never given respect as a young boy growing up. Their voice did not matter. It was, they had the authoritarian type of father where it's my way or the highway. I'll give you something to cry about. Just do what I said. Don't question it. They never had a voice or a place to examine their emotions, their feelings, their wants, their desires, their needs. There was no place for that. And so they grew up in this environment of disrespect. And so when they're getting on to their child and they feel like their child is not listening and is tuned out, they feel that wound of, I'm being disrespected, I'm not being heard, I'm not being seen. There's something wrong with me that I cannot earn respect, and I can't even get it from my own child. So instead of that allowing you to get triggered, it's important for you to understand that your child is in a trauma response at that time. Whether it is because they feel that they have disappointed you, whether it's because they feel unsafe in that situation, and your tone can make them feel unsafe. The words that you're saying, knowing that they upset you, that they crossed a boundary, that they did not show up well for you, can make them feel unsafe. So when they shut down, and it may be that you have not really taught them how to navigate conflict or how to navigate feedback or criticism, and if you're coming at them critically, it's no surprise that they have shut down, especially if you have impacted them with an avoidant attachment style and influenced them in a way where that is becoming their attachment style. Or if they are an anxious attachment style and they are afraid of the disconnect, and now here you are, they know they've disappointed you, you're yelling at them, you're frustrated, they can tell it in your tone. That can also create a lack of safety for them. So they are actually in a trauma response at that point in time. Their body says, this is too much, this is overwhelming, I've upset this person, I've let them down, or there's a disconnect between me and my caregiver, me and my parent. And so they shut down, they disassociate. Nothing is getting through at that time. You need to recognize that their nervous system at that point in time is in a flight response and they are unable to show up well. Or they may be in a freeze response where there's just nothing in their brain and they really do not have any sort of response to come back with. If they are appeasing or they are fawning, again, they are in a trauma response. So you're not going to get through at that time. But you need to recognize when you have pushed them and the signs that they are getting ready to go into that trauma response, and take a pause, go and regulate yourself at that point in time, and then pick up the conversation about whatever it is, whether they didn't pick up their room or they got a bad grade or didn't turn in their homework or they were being disrespectful to the mom or the dad. Whatever it is, the conversation needs to be had. There needs to be boundaries to help your children have secure attachment. There needs to be accountability, but it has to take place in a time when they are not in a trauma response. So as the parent, it is your job to recognize that your child has gone into a trauma response, hold space for them and validate their feelings, that they are overwhelmed, that it's too much for them to process, that this feels unsafe and unscary, and that they're upset that their relationship has felt a disconnect, or they've upset you and feel like things are not right with you. You need to be able to allow them to take time to come out of that trauma response, and hopefully sit with them and help them to process their emotions that they're feeling in this time before you come back to the problem that needs to be addressed. If you continue pushing them into a trauma response, that will become the way that they have to learn to adapt and survive when things feel overwhelming and do not feel good to them. That will become their new coping mechanism to deal with the situation if you allow them to just keep going into that and staying into that. So it's super important for you to recognize it and break that cycle instead of allowing them to stay in that place of being in a trauma response. So all of that to say, your child is not necessarily being disrespectful. They are not necessarily choosing to tune you out, blow you off, and dismiss you. I understand that it can really feel frustrating when you think somebody is doing this to you and you feel like your child just doesn't care what you're saying and they're not hearing you and they're not interested, or they're just going to do things their way. I totally understand that as a parent, but you have to recognize when it's a trauma response and they're not choosing to do this, or you're never going to get anywhere with them. So this is just one way that attachment style can affect your child relationship, your relationship with your child, how you impact their attachment style and their trauma responses, and how your trauma responses and your triggers can lead you into behaviors that will push them into their trauma response. I hope this shed some light for some of you guys that tend to rant and vent and notice that your kids are shutting down and you get really frustrated with it, and you allow it to trigger you. That's something that you got to work on so that they are not in a trauma response, and you need to recognize it so you can show up better for them and help them know how to get out of that trauma response. So in my house, it looks a little something like this. I have a very, very smart, my oldest is extremely smart. He's an intellectualizer. He tends to lean avoidant. And so whenever we're having a conversation about something that has to be had, and I'm having to give him feedback so we can improve upon something, let's say it's his room. He really has a hard time keeping his room clean. Whenever he is tired of listening to me talk about it, or he's feeling like it's just not feeling good to him, then he will literally verbalize and say, Mom, this is my limit. I really can't take it anymore right now, and I need a moment to process. And the next step for me as a parent is to reassure him that it's okay that he needs that space, to ask him how he feels about it, where he feels it in his body, where he feels the discomfort and where he feels upset, and then to sit in that with him and then go away and give him space. He is very much able to verbalize with me. This is why your children need a voice, because if they can't express these things to you now, guess what? They're never going to be able to express them in a marriage later, and it's going to cause such problems and conflict. So he will tell me, I need some space, I need time to process. And I know, because he has told me flat out, and I have to accept this feedback, that when he needs space, that means I need to literally walk away and give him time. Like, he doesn't want me to sit there in his room with me. He doesn't want me to help him process it. At this point, he has the tools to process it on his own and to do the nervous system work. So he wants me to literally leave him alone. And that's okay. That works for him. And when he is done, and usually when he's had 10 or 15 minutes to do that, he will come downstairs, he will take accountability, and then we can have a good, true conversation to get something resolved. I will be the first to admit I do not always get this right, just like most parents. I am triggered by my children at times. My oldest is very strong-willed, and he's very, very smart, so I definitely do not do this well all of the time, but we do these things as good as we can most of the time, and we are able to have this dynamic and definitely see progress and growth from when we were younger and we were figuring some of this stuff out together. So that's what it looks like in my house. I hope that helps you a little bit with what to do if you notice this happening in your child.